Welcome everyone to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, and joining me as always is Tim.
Hello.
I thought you were muted for a second there because you sort of did like a little motion as if you said something before you actually said anything. Try to keep me on my toes. So this is a horror movie podcast. We talk about horror films. We get together, we've watched a movie, we talk about it. It's really quite that simple. And it is Vampire Month here in January. So we are going to be talking about a film called Transfiguration, which I saw for the first time last year and knew that we had to do it on the show at some point. So when we decided we were doing a Vampire Month, it made sense that this was one of the films that were going to be put on the list. So did you watch this before now, Tim, or did you see this a while ago?
Yeah, this is my second time watching it. I forget exactly when I saw it. Because it's from a couple of years ago, which I definitely didn't see it right when it came out. Is probably around the same time you did, probably around last year at some point.
Yeah. So the premise of this one, and we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you warning before we go into spoilers. But the premise of this one is a teenager named Milo it believes he's a vampire, and he is draining people of their blood and drinking their blood. Whilst his sort of life is unfolding, and he kind of like meets a girl who he kind of bonds with and connects with. But it's definitely worth mentioning this is a very different type of vampire movie, and it's a very different type of horror movie than we typically cover. It's definitely drama horror, and it's way more of a character study and a character drama as it is a horror movie. We're definitely going to be talking about it in a different way than we normally do. Like, you know, we just recorded the Fright Night review, for example. This is not going to be the same type of conversation that we just had for Fright Night. So, very, very unique, very different. It's definitely got that kind of that indie movie sheen to it, where it's like we're going to do this, great little character study and make us all feel very tense, very emotional, do all these little different things. And it's not a cheery experience, I'll say that much. It is not a cheery film. But it does tackle a lot of different things. It tackles his character, why he is the way he is, what he's trying to achieve, or why he thinks the way he does. And it also tackles a lot of social issues. It delves into a lot of little things that all kind of forms into a movie that kind of goes about beyond. What am I trying to say here? It goes above and beyond just being a vampire movie about a teenager who's killing people, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yes. So I guess I'll ask the question, Tim. How do you feel about the Transfiguration?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's great. I can't really complain about it. It was funny because it's not like it hasn't been too long since I seen it, but I did before going into it, like I was trying to think. I was like, it's kind of funny for Vampire Month because I don't think there's that much vampire stuff in it, but when I rewatched it, there was actually more stuff than I remembered. I was actually a little surprised by that. Like again, it's not like a full on vampire horror movie in the way that you would expect. It's not like people are getting killed and having their blood sucked every 5 minutes, so it's definitely not like that, but there's more of a horror aspect than I remembered from the first time I watched it. But it's a very indie movie, in the way it sucks you in, and the characters are very compelling. The performances are great. Like I love Milo. The girl, apologize, forget her character's name. Sophie, yeah, like she's great. I really like the brother too. I think he has like a very interesting like character, and there's just a lot that to unpack here. Like you said, it's definitely more on the drama horror side, but the horror elements that are there are really good, and then the other stuff is very thoughtful and compelling as well. I probably do have like a few nitpicks like here and there. Like I do think it does like some indie tropes that I'm kind of like, all right, I don't think like we need, like, I don't know, there's just something about like indie movies where I just feel like every character like pauses for like 5 minutes before they like say anything. It always like kind of gets me. But I mean, I think it's like very like very very small minor complaints to what is like a really really good thought provoking intense kind of movie.
I think the word you used there, thought provoking, which I guess is two words, but that I think sums it up in the best possible way. I loved this when I saw it last year. It surprised me. I didn't know what I was getting into. I'd heard like a loose recommendation. I don't know if it was from a podcast or something, but I'd heard the Transfiguration is worth watching, and I was blown away by what it was. I think right away it has this kind of like stark, handheld, fly in the wall kind of filmmaking style, particularly during the horror sequences, that make it feel very visceral and make it feel very kind of almost too real in some ways, despite the fact that what's happening is kind of fantastical in a sense. And but ultimately, like, as a character journey that kind of explores why he has these urges and why he's doing what he's doing. And he's a character, and you're probably thinking, we mentioned that he thinks he's a vampire. It's not so much that he actually is a real vampire or that real vampires even exist in this world, but he does love vampire movies, so the subject does come up very frequently. But it's more about, like, what does that say about him and how he views himself, how he views the world. One of the things that the camera does a lot in this movie that I noticed it the first time, but I was really, obviously, second time watch here, hadn't even been that long since my first watch, so I was really taking in some of these details a little bit more, is so often when he's walking around the city or going home or wherever, like, the camera does a lot of wide shots. There's a lot of wide handheld shots of him just, like, in his world and showing the world around him. And I think that's a big part of this movie, is especially when you tackle it from the social side of things, of him growing up in this poor neighborhood as a black teenager, and how people in his community treat him, how police treat him, how all these things treat him. Like, it's this idea that it's very much about how he views himself in the world, because the world has conditioned him to view himself a certain way. This is his value in the world. And like, there's a real, obviously, sadness to that. There's a real sadness to what the society has kind of done to him. But then there's a personal side of it, which is, we get into a backstory of why his parents aren't around, like, and their deaths and what that's done to him, and that comes into it. So I think the character drama is wonderful, but ultimately, like, does it work on a scene to scene entertainment or a drama level? It absolutely does, because I get so invested in the relationship of Milo and Sophie, and all of their kind of awkward, like, back and forth, and like the genuine sweet moments between them, and worried that she's going to find out what he does, or worried that he's going to screw it up by doing something sinister or weird, or dare I say, even just being worried that he's going to kill her at some point, which is something that definitely crosses your mind at several moments throughout the movie, and you really don't want it. You want this to be the happy ending, and for him to go out and move on and find that happy life. So, like, the vampire thing works as a metaphor. It works. Obviously, it's a kind of a literal thing. One of the things that I was thinking the first time I watched it is that, is he even really doing any of this? Is this all in his head? And the movie actually makes it very clear as it goes on that it's not in his head. Like, that's not what the movie is. But it's the sort of thing where you could have done a version of this where it was just in his head. But I think the actually having him do these things is again, you go back into, like he's viewed as a monster, so he became as a monster to have the power and feel like he's in control, kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff going on, and this is one of these movies where I watch it and I go, like, I think I get the gist of what it was getting at, but I feel like 3 different people could write 3 different books as to what this movie's really about, and they could all be completely different, and they'd all be completely valid. And I think that's its strength. I think it's definitely an indie movie. It's a low budget movie. I do recognize the actress who plays Sophie, Chloe Sevigny, who popped up in the OA. She was in a couple other things recently. She's one of these actors who all of a sudden in the last, like, 5 years is popped up in, like, probably a bunch of stuff. Oh, sorry, Chloe Levine, not Levine. no E at the end. But yeah, how do you go?
Oh no, I mean, just her and Milo are both actors are really great, and yeah,
Oh,
definitely would love to see him in more stuff.
phenomenal. In fact, yeah, she popped up on Depraved, which we did just at the start of
Oh
the
yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah.
She was in an episode of Mr. Robot. She was in an episode of The Deuce. She was
Deuce.
in some of the Marvel Netflix shows. Well, she's in Defenders at least. You know,
Mhm.
so all of a sudden she was kind of popping up in a few places at once, and it was like, oh wait, I kind of really know who this actor is now because she's just
Yeah.
suddenly appeared and everything.
Yeah, she loves the pop up.
She loves to pop up, yes. But yeah, both of them are very very good, and it's you know I think it's very low budget, and there's so many movies that we talk about now where you can feel the budget and you can feel you're just constantly reminded of how cheap something is. And when I watched this movie, it not once in the entire thing did it even pop into my mind I'm watching something that has no money, because
Sure.
first of all, they shoot in real locations, so there's everything looks like it feels like the real world. That's number one. And then number two, the writing is actually telling a compelling story that has layers to it. So it doesn't have that, the characters are trying to like stall for time, or it doesn't feel like they're trying to like, I don't know, pretend to have a plot.
Yeah.
Like,
This,
on you go.
like this is like kind of what makes me angry, because yeah, I assume there was like very little budget probably, for this, and it looks like really really good. So it kind of makes me mad whenever we watch like some VOD horror movie and there's like this just really ugly like digital kind of look to it, where it's like, no, like you can make movies on the cheap that still like actually look like a movie.
Yeah, it just kind of accentuates the idea that the skill behind the camera is a reason why so many movies suck. Like it's why I never like when someone tries to remember, like, defend a movie like the we don't like, or even just in general when I see it online, and they'll say, well, you have to give it a break because it's very low budget, and I'm like, shit, Halloween was low budget and it's like a masterpiece. Don't give me this. Like, I get that people are struggling and they're starting out and they're trying to do their best, but I think Michael O'Shea, who wrote and directed this, I think it's a great movie. It looks good, performance is good, the script is strong. I can't recommend this one enough, to be honest. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you're looking for like a traditional horror movie, okay, it's not going to fill that void for you. It's just not that type of movie. But if you want something with a bit more nuance, with a bit of weight to it, a character story that has horror in it, and the horror comes from not only kind of the vampire stuff that's being kind of enacted in the film, but also just the sadness of where this character is and what's got him there is very horrific. And when you stop and think about it, it's kind of that sort of subtle, like, real world horror kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I always like the setting because I feel like it's strangely enough that something you don't really see in a lot of horror movies, and again, like you probably do see this more in like indie drama stuff, but I just like stuff that's like set in these kind of like inner cities and stuff, like I feel like so much horror is just always like in the suburbs, or in like summer camp or something. Yeah, it's just a setting that you don't see a lot of, or at least enough of.
Yeah, it's always a secluded, well, not always, but often a secluded area where there is something to be said about having horror where you're surrounded by millions of people and it still doesn't matter. Like the thing's still going to come for you, or in this case, the people around you are partly to blame for the world that you're in and the horror that you're living through.
And I think it's really interesting to see how this environment kind of shapes you, and like how you kind of learn to adapt and like survive in it. And like you see that there's things that he does to kind of like avoid like getting in trouble with certain people, and then you see like there's certain way that the cops act. Like, Jesus, the one scene where the cops are driving him home is like such a like shitty thing for them to do. Like, Jesus Christ. But yeah, like it's a interesting to see like how this environment affects everyone.
Yeah. And credit where credit is due, because they made me really like Sophie. despite the fact that she has a line early on that should almost just about cancel any character. I laughed out loud when I first watched it, and I laughed out loud again when I watched it this time. But when, you know, she sees that he has all these vampire like movies, it's like, "Oh, you're really into horror?" And he's like, "Oh, vampire movies," and she just goes, "Like Twilight? You should watch it. It's really good. Twilight's really good." Like, I'm like, "Oh my god, what? Kill her now!" But no,
I think though, like I think that generally like does work, and it actually does like lead to a really good callback in the end. But I think like, you know, that could be like a bit more of like a groaner thing if it was like, you know, dealing with like older people or stuff. But I feel like, you know, for the time of this movie and like the age these kids are though, like I do feel it's like kind of believable that, yeah, like she would be like, you know, into Twilight and stuff, and like, yeah, he would be like,
yeah,
nah.
it's a little borderline. I think what impresses me actually is, you know, this movie, you know, he sees tapes at one point and you can see all the labels and you see a bunch of vampire movies. He brings up vampire. He's got a really good taste in vampire movies, might I add. He brings up Let the Right One In. He even talks about Martin. Near Dark he mentions. In fact, let's be honest, the only thing he doesn't mention that he really should is the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Sure.
Quite frankly. But you know, like, there's so many mentions of like these different movies and talking about the rules from different things and what he thinks is right or wrong. I think there's so many like movies or TV shows where this could just feel like Ready Player One, where they're just referencing tons of things, and it never feels like that. Every time it feels natural. It feels like, no, he's really obsessed with this in an unhealthy way as well. I think that's one of the things, is that when you watch Ready Player One or a movie that's obsessed with referencing things,
it's like a Kevin Smith movie or something.
Yeah. Like, you get the feeling like it's always this place of like, oh, I love this thing. You know, the filmmaker loves this thing, so they want to like just name drop stuff left and right. And there's examples where it works a little bit better. Like, I think Stranger Things pulls it off better, where it's just sort of like, it's in the world, it's the background, these are the things that are going on, but it's not like the characters are constantly referencing things. But I feel like here it's not being used in that same way, like because the vampire thing is such a metaphor and such an active part of his character and what he's doing. Him, when he brings it up, it doesn't feel like, sure, he loves the things, but it never comes from this place of endearment. It always seems to come from, like, when he starts talking about which ones he thinks are quote unquote realistic, it feels kind of sad. It feels like he's kind of obsessed with these things, and it feels like a very negative thing for his character, that he is this kind of obsessed in this unhealthy way with this particular thing. So it doesn't even though it's like, you know, pointing out which ones are good, and I'm sure the filmmakers believe, you know, agree with us in this, they're pointing out Let the Right One In because it's a goddamn great movie and like we should know about it. But I don't think it comes from we want to name drop these things for that reason. It always seems to come up in a sense where it's portraying again how unhealthy he is with these movies, and it's portraying his thought process, and it's all of it kind of feeds into a negative thing, you know, that's relevant to his character, as opposed to, oh, we just want to name drop a bunch of vampire movies because that'll be fun.
Yeah, it feels a lot more natural versus like, you know, if you do hear people talking about movies and something like a Kevin Smith movie or like a Quentin Tarantino movie or something, like, you know, the dialogue is so snappy and clever, and like, I mean, that can be entertaining, but it's also like no one really talks about movies like that in their everyday life. Like, this actually feels like, oh yeah, this is just how someone would talk about these things if they liked them, you know?
Yeah. In fact, hell, she even brings up True Blood. Again, another awful mark against the character. But she brings up True Blood, and she talks about a scene from True Blood that actually kind of becomes relevant into a thematic sense for later in the movie. So I'll save what it is until we get to spoilers, but I don't know. I think it handled that all very... just in a deft way. Also, before we get to spoilers, I want to mention the poster because it's phenomenal. It's like, it's just it's the silhouette of, like, you know, him walking, but his shadow is Nosferatu. You know, for the classic 1920s Nosferatu shadow. Really neat.
Yeah, and like even when like they show like snippets of like movies and stuff, there's a lot I didn't even like recognize. That I think like at the end of the movie, I was like looking at the, you know, like they were listing like, oh, you know, this clip from this thing, and I was like, wow, like yeah, some of these like were beyond me.
I'm sure we'll get to them all someday. But
Yeah.
am I to assume that there may be, if not public domain, there'll be cheaper things to get a hold of, rights wise?
Probably. Yeah.
And that's why
Sure.
these are the ones we actually see clips of when he's watching stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It makes sense. It makes sense. All right. Well, I think we've sung the praises a little bit. So I will thank our Patreon producers at the time of recording. So thank you to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, David Short, Bornow, Al Tribesman, Christopher Moy, Brett Williams, and David Brown. They are Patreon producers for the month that we recorded. If you want the updated list of the time this goes out, they'll be on screen at the end of the video version. But we are recording in advance because Tim's going on paternity leave. So yes,
It's true.
he's going to be he's sired a child.
That's right.
I don't know what I'm trying to get at. All right, so yes, full spoilers, of course. Oh, and like and subscribe. I should always point out the free ways to support us because they are equally valid and even easier and simpler to do. So hit the like button on YouTube, rate the podcast 5 stars, and give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. All these things are super important. Okay, so full spoilers for the Transfiguration. So yeah, so much of this is like character stuff. I mean, the movie opens, of course, with a character in a bathroom, kind of hearing some noises and leaving, and then we see that Milo is sucking the blood from some man's neck who's lying there, kind of dead. And it feels kind of disgusting and gross because it is, it's presented in a very realistic way where he's just been sucking the blood out of some guy's neck, a hole that he's made in his neck with a knife.
Yeah.
It's, like I say, it feels visceral. It's a really stark opening, and then you follow him, home, and you follow him to school where he has to meet a guidance counselor. Which does, I mean, I'd forgotten about this, but the guidance counselor does make a point of asking, are you thinking about hurting animals? Which maybe suggests that he was actually doing this to animals first. Like, he did escalate to people.
That makes sense, yeah.
At some point along the way. But, yeah, and obviously he meets Sophie. One of the little character details that I really liked, or visual touches that I liked, is that when he first meets Sophie, Sophie's waiting on the elevator, and the elevator's broken, and he kind of like says, hey, the elevator's, not working. And she goes into the stairwell, and she's got bags, and she looks up, and I love when she yells up for help because she needs help carrying the bags. Like, her hair's basically covering most of her face. It's kind of like it's showing where she is, like, as a character right now as well. Because I think one of the big things that I felt as watching this, especially the second time, is that they're actually both in a place where they're kind of undead, right? To go with the metaphor of the vampire here, they're both undead because they feel they don't have a life and they don't have a future, and their lives are kind of over from what they were before, and they're in this rut. And the bittersweet ending where she gets to move on and resurrect, if you will, and he does not, is I think kind of like a lot of what the push and pull like heart of the film is.
Yeah.
And so I think establishing that she is equally, I mean, maybe not equally because she's not killing people, but she is also in a really bad place, in a place where she is ready to transform and move into something else. And the idea that Milo kind of lets her do that, like, his existence in her life is what gives her that opportunity.
Yeah, like, it's a really interesting and like depressing like thing to think about, where so often you feel like you're trying to like uplift kids and be like, hey, like, you can be anything you want to be, and you're the future, and like you're gonna be so successful someday. And it's like, yeah, because of their like economic situation and everything, and like living in the inner city, and you're not really having like parental figures and stuff. It's like they're not really seen as having this bright future. It's just kind of like they're just trying to kind of eke by and like become as the least amount of trouble that they can be. And it's like like just really like kind of dark and depressing. And I think that's why it's like interesting when you see like little bits throughout the movie where you're reminded that, oh yeah, these are kids, like like later on when they're watching like YouTube videos and laughing and stuff, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, like there's such like serious like characters throughout most of the movie, but every now and again it's like, oh wait, no, they're supposed to be kids. They're supposed to be like running around playing and laughing and having fun. They're not supposed to be like, this dark and depressed, this early on in their life.
Yeah, and they both went through stuff, of course, that's led them here. She's living with her abusive like grandfather in here. Milo is with his brother, who again, quote unquote, is also undead in the sense that he's just kind of in this rut. They're both in this rut after the suicide of their mother. That's something we learned throughout the film. And we even see that, in a quick sort of flashback moment, that she slit her wrists, and this was maybe the first time that Milo did actually go over and maybe drink some blood, because he tasted some of her blood. And his father died of an illness when he was young. Because what stuck out to me is when he was describing the illness that his father had, is that he knew for a while, and he was sick for a long time before he eventually died. And I kind of, again, read that as he was undead for some time with no hope of moving on or getting better before he eventually did go. And this idea that these characters are all in these places, this undead state of they've went through something traumatic, and it feels like life is over. It feels like life can never get better. Because his older brother is just he's all we ever see him do is sitting on the couch watching TV. That's all he's ever doing. And there's a couple of heartwarming moments where he kind of perks up a little bit when he tries when he gets he gets a little happy for Milo at a couple of points when he sees he's happy with someone, and he gets a little concerned when Milo might be in trouble with the gang members who are constantly outside the building, who of course factor into the plot quite heavily. The further we go on.
I think the brother's a really interesting character, because they don't talk about it much, but he was in was it to the army or something like that?
Yeah, they mentioned it doesn't get too specific. You assume it was just that he was in the military, but Milo says, when you were over there, did you ever see a dead body? And he talks about seeing body parts, but he never killed anyone.
So that's just another interesting aspect, because on the surface, it at first almost seems like a kind of like a boring, uninteresting character, because like you said, he's just constantly watching TV. He has a very kind of monotone way of speaking, and kind of speaks in just very short sentences and stuff. But then when they add that little detail, I feel like it opens the character up a little bit more, where he's probably seen some shit, he's probably in shell shock, and that's why he's kind of holed up in the house and just trying to deaden himself by just constant barrage of TV, so he doesn't have to think about whatever.
Yeah, I think that, and then obviously the suicide of his mother, because they talk because they both admit at one point that they both miss her. And again, it's going back to this society and having no hope of breaking out what society says you already are, because it mentions at one point that the gang members outside used to be his friends, and I think the assumption, if you want to read into this a little bit, at least that I made, is that he was friends with them at a younger age, right? Because he's not that old, because obviously he's still Milo's older brother, so he can't be that. Okay, you can have brothers who have big gaps, but he seems like he's in his early to mid 20s, and I got the impression from that line when they mentioned that he used to be friends with the gang members, is that they were friends when they were kids, teenagers maybe, and when they started to get into more gang-like activity and they started going down these paths of carrying guns and so on and so on, he split away from that, maybe at the advice of his mother or for whatever else, but he chose a different path, and he, to be good, to make the right choice, quote unquote, he chose the military, because he didn't have the option of going to college because they couldn't afford to do that, and he ends up back home, and instead of being in the gang, he is just disturbed by what he saw, and his life isn't really all that much better off for doing it. And kind of this idea, again, it's just this he's essentially a side character in the story, but even he adds this extra layer of someone who went into the military, presumably with the promise of this is going to make his life better. He'll come back, he'll get help with the other things because he served in the military and so on and so on. But ultimately, it's not really led him anywhere else. And I think one of the really sad parts of the metaphor of the whole movie for Milo is that there's a line really towards the end where he's talking about monsters, and and again he's kind of referring to himself, but he's talking about how monsters and how some people don't deserve to come back. He's not good, and he never will be. He always will be this monster. And it's this idea that society kind of already has made its mind up on who he is because he's a black kid in the city, and the gang's always harassing him, the police are harassing him. he's not got this thing, and then on top of that, you've got obviously the personal tragedies of the death of the parents. But it's this idea that he becomes this monster, he becomes this vampire, because he already feels like he's ostracized from society in this way, where he is kind of like seen as this not necessarily evil entity, but he's already seen as this outsider who is ignored. And I think there's almost like a power fantasy almost in that by becoming this monster, this vampire, he's taking control. Now he's the one who's doing the stalking. He's the one who's preying upon the weak and the innocent and so on. And obviously he's literally doing this, so you can't necessarily forgive him for the fact that he's killing people throughout the movie, or the fact that he literally kills a child at one point, like and probably one of the most tensest, like most extreme horror scenes of the whole movie. And the sad part of the ending is, which there's a lot of talk throughout the film, and I instead of going through an order, I'm kind of jumping around just to fit my theme here. But he, like, it's brought up repeatedly that he doesn't think a vampire can kill themselves, and it's just not possible. It's against the rules or something. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where Sophie brings up an example from True Blood. She talks about the vampire that made Eric, I believe was what she said, was so guilty about what they'd done that they just sat on the roof and waited for sunrise until they died. And because I knew what the ending was going to be this time, I was thinking about that when she said it. I was like, oh, that's kind of what the end of the movie is. It's like, it's Milo as a vampire deciding to get himself killed because he feels guilty about what he's done. And he has to, move on. So, but it's this idea that he, like, society's already decided that he is what he is, so he is kind of manifested that into something that is actually horrific, that is this, that is that. And the real world applications of this are of course, society gives up on you, so you end up in crime, or you end up like his brother, serving the military and ended up broken in that way, or whatever. And this is like an extreme example of someone kind of avoiding that. So that's kind of analysing from the society side of things. I think from the other side of things, the personal stuff, you talk about his mother dying, and the idea that both his parents, because it sounds like his father was kind of like undead, quote unquote, as he was sick. Again, I'm just trying to tie it back into the metaphor of the vampire.
Right.
And then again, his mother, presumably, who was really sad after that for years before she eventually killed herself, again was in this place where she felt she could never recover, and she was again, quote unquote, undead. So it's almost like, and he mentions this a couple of times in the film, where he talks about inheriting things, and he talks about how vampires pass on the disease via blood, and it's almost like he believes he's inherited this sadness, that he can overcome the sadness of his parents. And so I think it works from like a couple of different angles, and I don't think either one I can really give you like a full like essay as to how they both work thematically, but I can see them both being there, and both of them work really well. And there's obviously other scenes we're going to talk about that tie into either one, but I loved all that stuff, because it felt so enriched in what it was doing, and it made the character, even though he was killing people, it made him such a sympathetic and just a sad subject to watch, and sort of really kind of like explore what why he is the way he is. I found it a very hard hitting movie. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's very. I think there's so many like different like themes and stuff and metaphors like you're talking about that you can take out of it, and it's the movie. I don't know, just does such a like fantastic way of portraying them. It almost like seems easy, because it's like nothing is ever like there's so much that you can get out of it, but nothing is ever like stated, like like the stuff that you're talking about, like it's not like like they hit you over the head with it, like, see, this is why he's acting this way, or like they're not constantly bringing up the parents or everything. It's just like everything is just there enough to like really really get you the sense of like this life and everything that they're doing and why they're acting this way. But it's just really masterfully done, the way it like conveys that information.
Yeah, it doesn't overplay its hand. Just to sort of go back to the society thing again just for a second, I just want to, the final point I guess I want to make, the really sad part of this, is that society has convinced him that he is this and he's never going to become anything else or get out of it. So he doesn't see an ending. He doesn't see like a happy, like, get out of this sort of thing. He doesn't see a possibility of him ever being anything other than this monster. And when he realizes that he is a monster, he feels guilty, he wants to atone. And I think the idea that he's tempted to kill Sophie is what kind of ultimately is the wake-up call for him. Because it's notable that he stops killing for a bit. He like forgets to go out and kill. He forgets because he's got like a calendar. He keeps track of when he's supposed to go out and feed, quote unquote. And he kind of forgets because she's this positive influence on him.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that like that can kind of, you can relay that to the kind of like vampire stuff he likes. Like I mean, given his taste and everything, I don't think he would like Twilight anyway. But like, the idea of maybe these more positive, vampire things where they're more like these kind of like romantic heroes and stuff, like, that's he can't see himself as that. He can only see himself as, like the more villainous, monstrous versions, with in the media that he consumes and whatnot. Yeah.
So I think all that stuff is absolutely wonderful. I mean, there's obviously some key scenes we have to like talk about. There's a scene where this white couple sort of like drive up in the neighborhood, and they just call him over, and this is like the most absurd, like just random like profiling I've ever seen in my life in a movie, where this couple just shout over Milo and say, ask him if they can get him drugs, and based on nothing other than that he is a black teenager in this neighborhood. But Milo sees this as an opportunity and says, "Yeah, follow me." And he leads the guy into like the basement of the building and then hides, and in walks like the gang members who harass Milo, like every so often we see him sort of like make fun of him, stop him from getting the building, that kind of thing. And they get offended when the guy asks like if they can get them drugs, and they're like, "Wait, you think we're all drug dealers just because we're here?" And basically call him out on exactly what everyone was thinking when he tried to talk to Milo. But it escalates when he kind of jokingly gives a younger gang member a gun and says, "Hey, why don't you shoot him?" And he says that he never expected him to actually pull the trigger, but once he does, and the guy's like on the floor, like bleeding, he's like, "Well, I need to finish this now," and he kills him, and they all run. But it brings the police to the building, and it leads to a lot of stuff here where the scene you mentioned earlier, where the police, like after they've questioned Milo, they drop him off back in the place, but they make a point of letting everyone see him be dropped off without handcuffs. And one of them even shouts out, "Oh, stay safe, Milo. See you later, buddy," as if they're being friendly. The whole idea being that they want everyone to think that he snitched, to, give him hell, basically.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of like a subtle thing, because like at first I don't exactly get what they're doing, but then once you see that they're like, "Yeah, drop him off here," like right in front of the gang members, like, oh shit, it's like such a like, heinous, like, like evil thing to do. And again, it's like, one of those more like, messed up, like kind of societal things where like, the cops aren't treating him like a human or like a kid or whatever. Like they don't care about the consequences. They're just looking, to get what they need from him, and it's really messed up.
Yeah, that's horrific. And this is actually one of the times where his brother gets openly concerned. He's like, if they think you snitched, I can't protect you from them, that, right? And he gets very concerned and makes it very clear. It's one of the few times I remember him getting off the couch, because he comes into the room to like really make his point against them. And this is this is all happening, and then you also have, I mean, this leads to the ending, of course, as well, because we see that every time Milo kills someone, he like steals whatever they've got in their wallet. If they have any valuables on them, he'll take them. And so he's got like a little bag of like all this stuff he's collected, and he gives a lot of the stolen stuff to the lead gang member, and basically gets him arrested for the murder of not only the guy in the building that he did kill, but the family that Milo killed across town. And this is kind of his suicide play, because this is what as he's narrating, he's talking about how but a vampire can't kill himself, but he can maybe like arrange for his death. He can set something up so that he can die. And basically knowing full well that this gang member will know exactly how he was framed once he realizes what the evidence is, and there'll be a retaliation. And sure enough, we see Milo get shot down at the end of the film, and it's really sad because we get this montage of like him being like, taken to the coroner, and the autopsy, then in the coffin and being buried, and it's all playing out as Sophie has her kind of happy ending where she's like off to her cousins in a different state, and all the rest of it. So.
Yeah, and it's really sad, and because they kind of had a falling out for a bit, Milo and Sophie, when she discovered like his journals, but then like this ending kind of seems like they're coming together again, and then like she doesn't even like really realize what happened to him at first. She's about to leave, go on with her better life, and she's like trying to call him, and not I think just phone's going to like voicemail or whatever. It's really sad and touching.
Yeah, I mean their story, because we can't obviously go back and talk about this because they've got a lot of stuff. They because they get really close to the point where she ends up staying with them because their grandfather's so abusive, and they have this really blossoming relationship where they're really happy. It's kind of weird actually because they're teenagers essentially living together, and she actually finds all of his weird diaries and like rules and stuff when he's like out like paying bills. It's a really weird like grown up relationship for a couple of teenagers. And we didn't even mention that she does self-harm. We see her like cutting her wrists early on, and it's right after she's been like having like I actually thought she was getting paid at first. I don't know if she actually was. It might have just been more of a not a self-pity thing, but like she's here with like a group of guys like out in like a field, and they're taking turns with her, and there's this kind of sympathy. And I wonder if you can maybe like correlate this and say her putting herself like in this position is kind of similar to his vampire thing. This is kind of how she's like putting herself in this place that society expects her to be in.
Sure.
You can say like society expects him to be a criminal and it expects her to be a whore, kind of thing. That's kind of like what the movie's maybe drawing allusions to. But they both deserve better. They both deserve to have more than that. They both deserve to be other things and people that they want to be. And ultimately Milo gives her all of the money that he's got and says, "Don't tell anyone you've got it, just go." And she wants him to come too, and you want him to go with her. You want him to have his fresh start and like get out of this life. And maybe you can almost you almost respect him a little bit for knowing that he has this like thirst to kill, and he wants to like stop himself. But it's really sad because then you look at it from all the all the metaphorical context and the social context, and it's like, no, this is really sad. This is someone who doesn't see a future for himself, so he's accepting that he's going to die young. He's accepting this in a really sad way. It's hard hitting, but but yeah, she gets scared when she finds all that stuff for a little bit. But there's a lot of sweet moments. There's a moment where the brother Lewis like talks to her and says, you really like him, and she sort of smiles and says yes, and it's a really genuine moment that adds a lot of heart to the film, I thought.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, like it's kind of weird because like you said, it is kind of like a very weirdly like adult relationship where like like they're living together and he's going out and like like paying bills and like doing laundry and stuff. But then every now and again though, like you do get like the kind of like little glimpses of like how they should be though, where they do seem more kid-like and they're kind of like giggling and stuff, and like
well she's giggling. Notably when they're watching the dumb YouTube video, she's laughing hysterically. He's sitting there looking like he wants to murder everyone. Which, I mean, the video looked very unfunny to me, so I think I'm on his side with this particular.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't really understand the appeal of it, but I mean, again, like I'm sure that is something that like a kid that age would probably laugh at and think is funny, and I don't know, it is kind of like a weird relationship where it does seem like she wants to get him into like these more, I don't know, like lighter, less intense things, but he's just like, very hard for him to stray away from his like, like the brooding horror of the stuff he likes. Yeah. Which is, hey, totally fine, but.
Yeah, he takes her to the movies to see the original Nosferatu. And she says, "I like the music, but I like Twilight more." I think was the review she gave when they left the theater. But No, they have. There's a lot of scenes with them, particularly in the sort of the first half to the middle of the film, where they're, they'll be talking about the vampire rules and stuff, and like his philosophy and talking about them. It really shines a light. I think, especially on a repeat viewing, when I know where it's going and kind of what the movie ultimately is saying, that you kind of notice like how he discusses them, how he sees them, how he talks about them. And yeah, she is constantly trying to like say, hey, look at this more lighthearted thing. She buys him Twilight the book, which, as you mentioned, has a great payoff at the end, because he leaves her a note with the money that says, I read Twilight, it really sucks.
Like, especially it's so funny, like his because he's kind of doing like a voiceover narration when she's reading the letter, and it's just like his delivery of it is so great. It's kind of like, I guess in general he kind of has like a deadpan way of talking, but like yeah, when he says that at the end, it makes me laugh.
Yeah, it makes her laugh as well, because it makes me feel really sweet. I do love the idea though that this like essentially is like one big long joke to make fun of Twilight, but it's wrapped up in a really classy indie art house movie that's like really well done.
Yeah, for sure.
But it literally ends with a joke at Twilight's expense, which is really funny to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, one thing we haven't talked about yet is the horror scenes themselves, which I think we should probably discuss those scenes. Because the first one is just, he's already sort of attacked. We see him kind of lie in wait for like a homeless guy under the bridge in the park at one point, which again is sort of shot in silhouette. It's from a distance. It feels very visceral though.
Actually reminds me a little bit of Let the Right One In. Like that, there's that scene like under the bridge or whatever. So I don't know if that was an homage to it, but it kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, it may have been, for sure. And then there's a scene where he like is thinking about killing this kid who's like comes down.
That's intense. Yeah.
Super intense, because he's being kind of nice to him in a sort of really deadpan way, but the kid like thanks him, and he's got his pen, which is actually a blade. He's sort of got it ready, but he lets him go. And it's interesting because this is the point in the movie where he forgets to like keep feeding, and it's after I was gonna say Chloe there because that's his name, but it's after Sophie finds the stuff and kind of flees for a bit, because she eventually comes back and apologizes for freaking out and like, so you're writing like a book about vampires or something like that. She tries to sort of justify in her mind why he would have these really specific rules and stuff. But and I think that's part of the beauty of the relationship as well, is that when she tries to ask him to go with her towards the end, and he says that he's not good and he never will be, which again is that really sad sort of like way he views himself because of the world. She's like, I already know you're a weirdo. It doesn't matter. Like, she accepts him for who he is. It's kind of a beautiful thing. And again, yes, if you literally take into the account that he's murdering people, yes, that doesn't quite work in the context. But, yeah. So he stopped killing. But once she flees and he's on his own, and he tries to pretend that it's not a big deal, he doesn't care. But he immediately has to go out and kill. Like, he immediately starts going out into the streets, and he tries to find someone that he can kill, and he finds this sort of drunk guy, follows him home, and it's the drunk guy doesn't lock his door behind him, so he just comes in the apartment, and he sees this kid, this little girl, this guy's daughter, is just kind of standing there, and he rushes her and stabs her in the neck and drinks her blood, and notably vomits it out afterwards. I thought, which is maybe again a sign of him like sort of really seeing the horror of what he's doing. But he still does go into the other bedroom and like kills the guy and drinks his blood though. But because it's almost an interesting idea of like at what point did he decide, like, was her being scared of what she found and fleeing, is this the moment where he really started to decide that he had to find a way of killing himself? Like, did he intentionally go to this house and commit this crime because he knew he was going to frame the gang member for it? Is that something?
Yeah, it could be. Not sure.
You could have thought of that afterwards, admittedly, because he always takes stuff anyway. But it was something that I definitely thought about for sure. And I think it is notable. I think it is notable that all of his victims are white. I think that is intentional. It's intentional because the whole idea of like society seeing him as this other thing, as this potential monster, is very much about how society paints black people in the eyes of white conservatism or whatever, right? It's very much that. So I think the idea that he, like, the world sees him as a potential monster to white people is very much why they've picked all the victims being white in this movie. I don't think that's an accident. And again, it adds to the messaging and the themes and all that.
Yeah.
But there is a sort of dream sequence where he imagines biting because they go out on a date at one point to like a fairground, to the boardwalk, and he imagines biting her, but then he snaps out of it and he wakes up.
Yeah, the I think all the horror scenes are like done really well. They all feel very visceral, like they're all like a lot of like shadows and silhouettes that just like make it look really cool, but it also just feels like very like like dark and dangerous and
very uncomfortable feeling, I thought.
Yeah.
In a good way. I think it's also one of the few times that the horror scene, with the exception of the ending, which does have music, I'm pretty sure the horror scenes are maybe the only scenes in the movie that has music, because a lot of it is played in silence. But whenever the horror stuff starts, there is kind of a pulsing, there's kind of a ethereal horror track that's playing over it, and it does give it this kind of like feeling. It trains your brain to know that the music means that there's murder in the brain, kind of thing. So obviously it's less of a horror movie than maybe some of the stuff that we typically watch on this show, but I think the horror stuff is handled very well. But obviously I do think the larger like premise of the movie is very horrific, just more in a real world way, and a more natural kind of, I don't want to say subtle, but certainly not as an in your face spooky monsters jumping out at you and going ah.
Yeah, like I think a lot of horror fans would probably still dig it, just because that you can relate to like someone being obsessed with like vampires and stuff, and that there is still like pretty horrific scenes and everything. So I mean, I think as long as you know what you're getting into, I think most people would enjoy this. Like, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a light, fun monster movie, obviously you're not going to want to watch this, but yeah, it still would be something I'd easily recommend to people.
Yeah, for sure. I really can't praise it enough. Everything with like what his obsession with vampires and his need to feed them blood like means, everything about what that's trying to say, either about him as a character or about his place in the world and how he sees this. This is what I'm talking about. Where I see two clear paths of like interpretation with this one. I see the societal kind of political commentary of how he feels and his place in the world and what he's been convinced and conditioned to believe his place in the world is, and how sad and depressing that is, and how that turns into the vampire thing, or the personal stuff where how he, and you could argue that they blend together seamlessly. You could argue that part of like what his parents went through to some extent, maybe not his dad getting ill, of course, but is also a condition and a knock-on effect of the world, and how the opportunities that they either had or didn't have. So obviously the brother factors into that. But at its core, I also think the movie is about all these people who are in this rut. Both the main characters and the brother are all in this place, and it sounds like the parents were as well, where they were past this point where it felt like the world was over and they had no hope of getting out. And you're hoping that they do. You're hoping that they do find a way to overcome the circumstance they're in. And he gives her this chance. So you get this happy ending for her, but it's super bittersweet because he does it at the expense of his own life. And his thinking is that he is a monster. He has literally killed people, so he does need to like take himself off the board, which makes him super sympathetic because he is aware of what he's done. He is aware of the murder he's caused. There's layers. There's so many layers, and I can't recommend that enough. And I feel like with each passing viewing, it's going to just get more rich with the ideas and stuff.
Sure. Yeah, like I was surprised at how much I was still into this, even though it probably I mean most it probably been maybe like a year since I watched it, so I don't know if it knowing everything that happens and having it be a little bit more of a recent view, if it was gonna maybe be a little duller or boring watching it again. But I got like sucked up into it, like right away, and you know it's a great length too. Like it's not like overly long or anything. You know, it still feels compelling, even though like you know even when it's just people talking and stuff. Like yeah, I was you know really impressed watching it again.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. It's massively directed, I think, because I think the second that first scene, as soon as it starts, you feel kind of like on edge. So it immediately gets the feeling across, and it never lets up throughout. It knows exactly how to handle each scene. And I say it, what I really mean is Michael Shea, the director, knows how to handle each scene. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean. So no, wonderful stuff. I guess we're at the time to rate the film. So what are you giving the Transfiguration?
I think I'll give it an 8.5. I mean, you know, everything we just discussed, like, you know, it's really great. I mean, it has captivating characters, has good horror elements. It's, you know, really interesting. And again, there's just a lot of stuff to think about and unpack. And, you know, it's a movie that stays with you for sure. And yeah, and performances are great. It really isn't anything, you know, too bad that I can think of. I mean, could even maybe get bumped up a little bit, maybe upon further viewings. But yeah, I think right now it's 8.5 for me.
I'm gonna go with a straight 9. I think this is one of my favorites, my recent favorites. It's come out in 2016. I don't think I mentioned that at the start, but you know, I think this, as far as the last decade goes, this is one of these movies where yeah, this was early enough last year that I think I put it on my top 50, because we did the top 50 of the decade at the end of the year.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure this popped up quite high, and having seen it again, there's no hesitation to keep it at the same height, if not move it up a little bit. It's wonderful, and you know, just the sad tragedy of the vampire realizing that he's a vampire and that he's hurting people. So she, you know, she compares it. I just, there's something so funny to me that she actually brings up a scene from True Blood, and it ends up kind of foreshadowing what the real ending of the movie is, and just how sad and tragic all that is. It's just wonderful. So 9 out of 10 from me. Cannot recommend the Transfiguration enough. So there you go. And that's, you know, obviously we're doing a vampire month. Fright Night, which, you know, first is kind of your mainstream, more campy, traditional vampire story. This is us saying, hey, here's your more intricate, you know, different style, unique film that, you know, challenges your preconceptions of what a vampire movie can be. And I think that's a good balance to have. Obviously, some of the classics we've already done. You know, we should mention, yeah, we've already reviewed Let the Right One In. We've already reviewed Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. We've already reviewed, you know, a number of big vampire movies. So make sure you check it, because the playlist on YouTube, I never mentioned this enough in the videos, but I actually have got playlists on MailFuzz TV's YouTube channel. You can find like a vampire review playlist with all our vampire movies, and same as zombies, werewolves, you know, all that sort of stuff. There's playlists. Check the playlist section. It's useful. It's also broken down by decades as well, if you like a sort of decade pick and mix of reviews. But yes, at the risk of boring Tim any longer explaining playlists, I will tell you that if you've made it this far in the review, put the phrase "Twilight sucks" into the comments. In fact, I encourage that pretty much always, to be honest, but definitely on this review, to let us know you got to the end. I'll make Tim pose for the thumbnail, so here we go. 3, 2, 1, pose. I don't know why Tim looks so happy. I guess other than the fact that it's a great movie, but questionable. So yes, you can do that. You can check out the comments and let us know what you think of the movie. You can like, subscribe. You can get us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, as we mentioned earlier. Catch us on Twitter at Screams Midnight for updates and silly nonsense that Tim posts from time to time and all the rest of it. You can also check out other content that we have on MailFuzz TV. Look out for the Atomic Cinema Experiment, the sci-fi movie podcast that I do with Tara, or you can look out for all the TV reviews that I do with Connor. A bunch of stuff on there to go check out. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, and we will see you next time.